Let's turn to the book of Obadiah. This one's a little hard to find in your Old Testament because in most Bibles it's only a couple of pages. Shortest book in the Old Testament, much like Jude in the New Testament. Maybe about the same number of verses now that I think about it. Obadiah only has 21 verses. So we may have the luxury today as we kind of go through the outline to just read the whole book. So that'll be something obviously we can't do on most of the books that we've looked at this morning. The author of the book of Obadiah is likely Obadiah himself. At least it records his visions given by God to the kingdom of Judah. He's otherwise unknown in the Bible. A lot of prophets, of course, are quoted by others, even Jesus and some. We don't have necessarily those quotes of Obadiah, but he is cited by Jeremiah in Jeremiah 49, verses 7 through 22, is nearly a direct quote from Obadiah verses 1 through 9. So there is that reference as well. The date for the book is pretty uncertain. And this is a little bit more difficult because usually it's a divide between more conservative scholars and less conservative scholars. Here we have even some conservative scholars. The dating ranges anywhere from between the 850 BC time frame clear down to the 500s after the destruction of Jerusalem. And that may be due in part to the fact that the difficulty in nailing down a date for this is there's just so few verses in the book itself. A lot of times scholars can look at a book like Isaiah or Jeremiah and read some of the things referenced to, and you can come to, it talks about things that they know happened at certain time periods. Well, there's not much to pull from in just 21 verses, so that might be part of it. The shortest book in the Old Testament, consisting of only 21 verses, bears the distinction of being the most difficult of the prophecies to date. So, and again, runs all the way from the time of Jehoshaphat down to the destruction of Jerusalem. Some Bible scholars say that Obadiah was written very early. Others say it was written very late, so I'll let you put whatever date you like for that. I'm going to choose, I lean toward the older date, but smarter people than me could probably back me in a corner and prove otherwise. So be that as it may, it's been accepted, of course, over the centuries by faithful people as being part of the original Old Testament, so we'll run with that. Got questions or comments? Flag me down as I go along. Part of the problem with the dating is if you don't know exactly when this was written, sometimes it's hard then to pick out who exactly he's writing to. But if Obadiah did indeed write around 840 to 830 BC, the book was addressed to the people of Judah, that southern kingdom, just after King Jehoram and during the reign of the wicked king Athaliah, the evil king Ahaziah, and the young Joash. And if you know your Bible history, Old Testament history, that was a difficult time among a lot of difficult times for the people of God. Queen Athaliah was a piece of work, and a lot was going on at that time that there was obviously things God wanted to say to the people because of that. Obadiah was a prophecy about one particular surrounding nation that was causing Judah some trouble, and that's the nation of Edom. Edom. Where did the nation of Edom come from for you Bible scholars?
Esau.
Yeah, Esau, right? You go clear back to the time of Jacob and Esau. Of course, God chose the younger son, Jacob, to be the one through whom the Messianic line would come. And even though Esau was the firstborn, he sold his birthright. You know all the story there. But Esau became the Edomites. Nation, God says there'll be a mighty nation come from you as well. But so there's some familial ties between Israel and Edom, but yet they were at odds a lot of the time, especially by the time you get into the kingdom period. Again, it was a prophecy about Edom's doom, but it was a comfort to Judah, which had just suffered bitter defeat at the hands of Edom. The purpose of Obadiah is to pronounce doom on Edom. The capital of Edom was Petra, and to predict the restoration of the land of Israel. So that's kind of what's going on here. Mainly directed these words against Edom, and as we'll see as we go through the outline and the theme, Edom was a very proud nation. They had their times when, it'd go back and forth. Sometimes, likely in the time of David, he expanded the borders back of the kingdom to where sometimes Edom was under Israel's thumb, and it went back and forth like that, like with many of those foreign nations. But let's go with questions before we look at the outline or comments. All right. Let's work through the outline. Like I say, I just want to read the text along with this outline. That'll be a privilege we don't normally get, as I said. First of all, it'll be more than the first half, I guess, but verses 1 through 16 is where God, through Obadiah, talks about this doom that's going to come upon Edom because of how they've treated the people of God. Verses 1 through 9 speaks of the certainty of Edom's overthrow. Let's follow along as I read through that. Verse 1 through 9. The vision of Obadiah, thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord, and an envoy has been sent among the nations, saying, Arise and let us go against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You are greatly despised. The arrogance of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the cleft of the rock. By the way, there's a reference. If you know the region of Petra and Edom, it was built in some of these pictures that stand out in my mind. There's these canyons go back into the surrounding hills and these sheer cliffs, and they've built into the sides of all of that. And that was a kind of a source of their pride. Nobody can handle us. Well, anyway, that's part of that. Middle of verse 3, in the loftiness of your dwelling place, there it is, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the earth? Though you build high like the eagle, though you set your nest among the stars, from there, God says, I will bring you down, declares the Lord. If thieves came to you, if robbers by night, oh, how you will be ruined. Would they not steal only until they had enough, rather? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave some gleanings? Oh, how Esau will be ransacked. And by the way, he goes back and forth between calling them Edom and Esau, same group. Oh, how Esau will be ransacked and his hidden treasures searched out. All the men allied with you will send you forth to the border, and the men at peace with you will deceive you and overpower you. They who eat your bread will set an ambush for you. There is no understanding in him. Will I not, again, God doing the talking here, Obadiah rather is recording it and relaying the message, but God says, will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy wise men from Edom and understanding from the mountains of Esau? Then your mighty men will be dismayed, O Teman. That's another Edomite city. So that everyone may be cut off from the mountain of Esau by slaughter. And again, those are words of certainty, right? And God, being the sovereign God, has the luxury of making statements like that and can back it up every time. If God makes a threat, guess what? He's going to keep that threat.
Militarily speaking, at least historically, the two advantages a city has are good walls or elevation. Probably elevation is better because you can see the enemy coming.
Sure.
And so, the Bible talks about a city broken down without walls, and that was in Nehemiah's time. The problem with Jerusalem was defenseless; it didn't have walls.
Sure.
But it seems like here that Edom has done all the right right things as far as geography, right? They picked the higher cliffs to build on. It would make them pretty much impervious.
Yeah.
God said, guess what?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no wall high enough to keep God out if it's his purpose to destroy a nation, and that's exactly what's going on here. That's why, again, we're kind of calling it the certainty of Edom's overthrow. Nothing is going to forestall this, no planning on their part. Then verses 10 through 14, God deals more with the cause of all of this. He's made his threats, if you will, of this coming destruction. Now notice what is said, starting in verse 10. And here's, again, why is God doing this? Because of violence to your brother Jacob. You will be covered with shame. You will be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gate and cast lots for Jerusalem, you too were as one of them. So you see what's going on here, right? There was that tie between God's people and the Edomites. But God says there came a time when your brother needed help, and you just stood on the sidelines, right? Didn't do anything about it. Didn't step in. Verse 12. Sure.
Wasn't that the real issue rather than Edom? I'm old enough, I can't even remember where I put my shoes. But, rather than Edom being an aggressive enemy, they were rather passive ignoring when Judah needed help.
Yeah. And that's a great point to make, because that makes you just as culpable, right? You know, you think about in modern times, if I stand by and watch a crime being committed and don't step in, what makes me any different than the person perpetrating it? Yeah, there's some difference there, but...
Or any mistreatment, by the way.
Yeah.
Or even worse, some of them were cheering and what was going on.
That's what you see here in verses 12 through 14, don't you? It says, do not gloat over your brother's day, the day of his misfortune, and do not rejoice over the sons of Judah in the day of their destruction. Yes, do not boast in the day of their distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their slaughter. Yes, you do not gloat over their calamity in the day of their disaster, and do not loot their wealth in the day of their disaster. Do not stand at the fork of the road to cut down their fugitives. See, the idea there is, you know, the other nations were devastating Judah, and Edom, if you will, were picking off the stragglers. Wow, that's brave. And do not imprison their survivors in the day of their distress. So God calls them on the carpet here for the cause of God says, I'm bringing judgment, and here's why. All right? Some good reasons for all of this. Then finally, verses 15 and 16, the character of this overthrow, if you will. For the day of the Lord, and there's that phrase again, when we looked at the book of Joel here a class or two ago, that theme comes up in the prophets. It's the day of the Lord. It's not necessarily just a specific 24-hour period. However long God takes to bring that judgment, that's the day of judgment. And it happens over and over again at various times throughout history. There's been several days of the Lord before. So anyway, for the day of the Lord draws near on all the nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your dealings will return on your own head, because just as you drank on my holy mountain, all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and swallow and become as if they had never existed. All right, so there you have, again, Edom, the doom coming to Edom. But where does that leave God's people? Right? If indeed Obadiah is writing this to the people of Judah, let's talk about the deliverance God, or the restoration God promises, right? He's been focused on Edom up to this point. But Obadiah is just talking to God's people, and God has a plan for them as well, starting in verse 17. We'll have the ultimate triumph of Judah, verses 17 and 18. Things don't look good for them right now in Obadiah's time, but the day will come when God will do what he says to Edom, and things will get better. But, and here's the contrast, but on Mount Zion, and that's just a reference to, again, the people of God, Jerusalem. But on Mount Zion there will be those who escape, and it will be holy, and the house of Jacob will possess their possessions. Then the house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau will be stubble, and they will set them on fire and consume them, so that there will be no survivor of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. So the tables will be turned for the nation of Judah. The treasures of Judah are referenced in verses 19 and 20. And these are references again to some surrounding things. But it says, then those of the Negev, or the south country, will possess the mountain of Esau. Those of the Shephelah, the Philistine plain, and possess the territory of Ephraim and the territory of Samaria. And Benjamin will possess Gilead. And the exiles of this host of the sons of Israel who are among the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, and the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad, will possess the cities of the Negev. So again, the time will come when fortunes, if you will be reversed. The devastation that Judah had endured up to this point, God will reverse that. The delivery is the final verse, and the word here, at least in the New American Standard, says, the deliverers will ascend to Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's. And I love that last phrase. And I think it's a good thing. And again, God didn't ask me whether it was good for him to do that. But ultimately, after the dust settles, guess what? It's still God's plan and purposes that are most important. And the kingdom will be the Lord's. Yes, Esau has a role in this drama. Judah has a role in this drama. But never forget, in the ongoings of the world, and this is something I have to struggle with, and maybe you do as well. You watch the news or you hear the news, and I try to avoid as much of it as I can, but you get to thinking, boy, there's no way this mess will ever be straightened out, and you start to wring your hands over it. But ultimately, the kingdom will be the Lord's, right? He's the king, sovereign king of the universe, and it will work out for that. So I think that's a great final verse there. Any thoughts over any of that? All right. Let's talk about the theme I've chosen. There's one theme, and we could pick several here. We could use the day of the Lord again. That comes up in this writing. But I think, or I like the theme of pride. That's the ultimate problem I think God is dealing with in the nation of Edom here. They were a proud people, and that pride allowed them to mistreat their brothers, Judah, or Jacob. You've got the problem of pride. We read through it, but let me just highlight again some of the verses. It's mentioned right away in verse 3. We read it as early as that. Again, this arrogance of their heart, and arrogance led them to have this pride. And we talked about it a while ago with Jim. They had their cliffside fortresses looking down on the enemy. It was almost as they were saying, we dare you to come in and try to conquer us. People have tried before, and nobody's been able to do it. On and on the boasts go. So they were very proud people. Their pride led them to violence. We read about that in verse 10, because of violence to your brother Jacob. And pride often does that, right, in the human heart. We get prideful and we think we can treat people however we like. No, God notices that. Not only violence, but an uncaring attitude. We highlighted that in verse 11, right? We don't care about what's going on. They gloated. Peter highlighted that, verses 12 and 13. Pride led to gloating. I don't tolerate that very well, right? I've never cared for athletes that and I realize some of them are some of the best athletes on the planet, but when I see, I don't care how good they are, if they start to taunt their opponent, that's game over for me. I don't like that kind of thing. maybe others feed on that, but you don't have to embarrass your opponent. Do your job, right? Go ahead.
Just as a note, now, if you do that, you get penalized
Yeah.
for it now.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't Muhammad Ali doing that to get in your head?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some.
That's what they're
Yeah,
doing it for.
that's exactly right. But again, I guess if you're confident in your abilities, you don't have to show up your opponent. But yeah, it's part of the game. I always appreciated. I'm getting off on a tangent here. I'm not a Dallas Cowboys fan.
It's kind of like underdog.
Yeah, I always appreciated Emmitt Smith as a running back because he scored a touchdown. He crossed the goal line, just handed the ball to the ref and got back to work. Sometimes you can have a 5-minute show after somebody scores a touchdown. Anyway, get off on a rant there. But in this case, Edom was gloating in a very evil way. They were seeing somebody oppressed and mistreated, and they were happy about that. Maybe there's a lesson there we can talk more about. Ultimately, this pride ended in the killing of fugitives. And again, that's picking off the strays. That's not good at all. So God's going to punish this pride, and we've read, let me just go through the list here of some of the statements God makes in dealing with this prideful nation. In verse 2, God says, I will make you small among the nations. Edom thought they were pretty, a big dog on the block. And maybe humanly speaking, they had their place in history, but compared to what God was doing, God says, I'll make you little. That's what I need to do. I'll bring you down, verse 4. God says in verse 6, Esau or Edom will be ransacked. They were picking off spoil and fugitives from Jacob, and God says it's going to turn upon your own head. The men at peace with you, verse 7, God says, will deceive you and overpower you. So allies are going to turn against him. That's part of what God is going to use to judge Edom. Verse 10, you will be covered with shame and you will be cut off forever. Verse 18, there will be no survivor of the house of Esau. And again, verse 21, right there at the end, the purpose again for all of this is the judgment God is bringing on the mountain of Esau or Edom. I've chosen verse 15 out of all, just these 21 verses as a theme verse. For the day of the Lord draws near on all the nations, and particularly in Edom's case. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your dealings will return on your own head. And that's an important thing to remember. Sometimes we think, I'm just thinking of humanity in general, not specifically here, but humanity in general seems to think that I'll escape judgment for what the misdeeds I've done, but the God of heaven knows. So, all right, let's spend some time highlighting some lessons from this short book in the Old Testament. They're going to be tied to pride, obviously. That's part of what God is dealing with here. But, and I meant to look up the verse here, so somebody may have to do that, or the text may come to your mind. But one overarching lesson from the book of Obadiah is that pride leads to destruction, right? Now, there's a verse in Psalms or Proverbs that speaks to that, right? Pride leadeth to, even getting back in the old King James there, pride comes before a fall is the way we say it, right? Have you ever seen that play out in someone's life, or maybe your own life, right? There was a time when you were prideful about something, or I was prideful about something, and it really hurts when you're brought down low after that, usually. But pride leads to destruction. Trusting in strength and wealth apart from God is dangerous. But we're tempted to do that, right? Edom was tempted to take pride in their strength, their dwelling place, their fortifications against enemy attack. Nobody can touch us. Well, trusting in strength and wealth apart from God, again, is a dangerous thing. It's another verse that just comes to my mind. Society about, those who trust in horses and chariots. those military might. I mean, something can help me out where that's found as well. But no matter how many nuclear warheads you have, guess what? If God, you can't forestall what God's doing, if that makes some sense. Pride leads to destruction. Why do we go down that path, though? It leads to trouble. Number 2, second lesson, do not rejoice in other people's troubles. That's tempting, isn't it? Especially if it's someone maybe we don't like for one reason or another, or it's another group that we don't fit into. It's so easy to sit back and gloat over that kind of thing. But that's dangerous as well. God calls Edom to task here for gloating over what had happened to God's people. Edom's gloating led to its downfall, at least partly speaking. Don't rejoice in other people's troubles. Thoughts on that? Why is that, why is that tempting?
Go back to Hantu.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and there's a sense there where, that's a fine line to tread because there are scriptures. I mean, you read some of the Psalms, right, that are part of the scriptures that say, God, do this to these people, and it's real easy to cross over from something that's maybe not too harmful there into the realm of gloating, like, God, take them out because I want you to do it, or something like that. But yeah, I guess in the grand scheme of things, it's better to not take our own revenge. The Bible talks about that, so leave that up to God. But gloating over someone's misfortune goes nowhere good.
There's another saying, kicking someone down.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, yeah, that'd be a more modern day proverb, but that's true, right?
And Mike, it just doesn't say very much about a person that they take pleasure in bad things happening to somebody else, no matter what.
Because ultimately, what in my experience, that again, it comes around to get you, like you're saying there, right?
Karma. Now we're going to talk about karma.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's the modern day expression of that, isn't it? Right.
I guess, I'm going to get in trouble probably, but I don't care. I'm hearing a lot now from my religious friends that God is working out his plan in various countries, and I don't think that stands very good textual criticism. For a lot of reasons, he deals with nations differently now than he did then. And I say that because the temptation is you read something like this, oh, well, God's moving in this country, he's going to straighten us out. I don't think God's going to straighten us out. Because that's not his mission now. But what I can get from this is personally, because I'm a pretty intense guy, and I got to be careful about being glad when somebody suffers something, and I'm pretty good at that. But I've got other sides of that I do,
Sure.
And I guess I'm bringing that up because it's easy to read some of these things and think, oh, he's just talking about nations and
Yeah.
No, that's not. That's
Okay.
not what's in there, and he's not working that way today.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm kind of thinking nations are destroyed from within, right? And it's like, we go to church to make ourselves better, maybe we should be policing ourselves just as much as other people.
Well, yeah,
police
yeah.
themselves. Yeah, I think he's.
My Bible doesn't tell me.
I don't think anything's changed.
My Bible doesn't teach me to tell you how to live. My Bible tries to teach me how to live.
Well, yeah, it's hard enough to just working on us, right?
It's easy to always look out and try to find the villain, and it's harder to look inward and make the changes that need to be made. So, good points. Lesson number 3, God, again, holds sin accountable. No injustice goes unnoticed by God. Now, that doesn't mean God deals with every injustice in the way we might like it dealt with or in the time frame and all of that, but, God will deal with that in His own time and His own way. And then finally, God's kingdom. God's kingdom is ultimately sovereign, and that's in comparison to every other human kingdom, right? Kingdoms rise and fall, humanly speaking. God has an eternal kingdom. God's purposes will be accomplished. Again, God wants to work in human hearts. He's in our own hearts to have us live, and perhaps that's the greatest lessons we can take away from this, is this idea of pride and think about how I can deal with that in my own life and vice versa. So, final thoughts, Peter?
If you look through history, no country or empire has ever lasted more than 4 generations,
Okay.
no matter what. Four generations is maximum. Most of them average about 3, but some of them make it to 4, but after that, no.
Well, we all have the tendency to think our nation's the exception, but we have our own sins that God can deal with. So yeah, I'm glad He's in charge of that, not me. Anything else?
After reading Amos and some of these books, God is dealing with so many people, even their military, their families, everything.
Right.
What is left? I don't know, it's just a big, process before that comes back to the remnant.
And there's that idea of the remnant, they're numbers-wise, the faithful are always less than the masses. That's if I'm hearing what you're saying. So, whatever the dark time, I think of Elijah, right? Elijah thought he was the only one left, but yet God says, no, I've got others. So.
Well, during this time of these, nations and peoples, is that when God dispersed a lot of people, Jews, into other countries all over the world?
Yeah, that especially was the case with both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. They were taken into captivity, and ultimately that has a part to play in what God was doing through the Messiah. We don't want to lose sight of the fact in all of these.
Yeah, it's all pointing to Christ.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in these Old Testament stories of national struggle, but yeah, we do need to remember God is working out His ultimate purpose, and that's to save the world that's a mess through the Messiah. So, yeah.
These other countries that they went to did not deal with
Okay.
either, so that God's years.
Yeah.
Everyone,
Okay.
even though they weren't common,
Sure. It's hard to know that, if it's not revealed, it's difficult to know exactly what God's trying to work out. You read the text and try to come away with our best understanding, but we may be missing some things yet. So, all right, thank you. Let's talk next week about the book of Jonah. It's come up in some of our discussions so far, 4 chapters there. So, Lord willing, I guess we'll be in December by next time. Where did the year go, right? Thank you.